Welcome back, everyone, to the Kirsten On podcast. And as promised, I'm here with Lauren. Lauren, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Cindy.
I'm so happy that we're doing this. I've been following you for a while. We had met quite a few years ago now. Well, I'm not quite a few years, but
Yeah, like a decade. I actually said that this morning in my Instagram stories. I was like, we go way back
right?
to a time before kids at that neuroscience conference that we had met at.
Exactly. Oh, fair enough to say it's been a while.
Yeah.
Time passes by too fast, but I've been following you and I love the work that you're doing. And I just thought it was so important for us to share this with our audience and to learn a little bit more about what you do. So, you do a lot, actually. You wear quite a few hats. And in addition to being a doula and a yoga expert, you are a fertility coach as well. Can you explain a little bit in terms of what brought you there in your journey and what is a fertility coach?
Yeah. So I am a fertility coach. I'd say most fertility coaches are in the business of helping women get and stay pregnant. So that's absolutely what I am doing. But I think what differentiates fertility coaches is the approach that they use. And so my approach is a holistic approach. And it's a holistic approach which integrates mindset work with nervous system regulation and what I call a body based approach to emotional processing. So rather than trying to work with emotions, kind of with cognition and the brain and logic, that we're really doing somatic work. So soma means body in Greek, and we're actually going into the body to see what those emotions feel like.
I'm so glad that you do that part and that the emotion regulation piece and the system regulation piece is there because we talk about emotions and we don't think about how it impacts our body and that there is this the somatic aspect to it and there is this nervous system regulation aspect to it and I'm glad that you do this holistic approach. So you are also a doula, so you get to see people that are very excited, expecting, and in that journey, but then there's a stress that comes with trying and it's not working, and couples that I've spoken with talk about the not just the emotional impact but the stress aspect to it. What have you seen in your work? And I'd love to learn more about what that looks like, everything you just described. Now, how do you support that couple?
Yeah. So in terms of the stress that comes with the fertility journey, it is huge. And I think a big aspect of why it is so stressful is this piece of uncertainty. So we as a human species, I think we really like to know answers. We like to have answers. We like to know why. I think a lot of us who are especially, brought up in a traditional education system or, who wear our professional hats, we play roles where we like to problem solve. We've been taught to problem solve from this very logical point of view. And when it comes to fertility, there are a lot of things that, we sometimes can't have answers to. And so we seek those answers. And, today we are blessed to have so access to so much information. And so what I see is that my clients, they, of course, as we most do, and, I know your audience is largely, you cater a lot to parents. And, I'm a parent and I was a new parent 10 years ago, and I still do work with new parents. And, whenever we are looking, we have a problem and we're looking for answers, what do? We turn to Google. We turn
Exactly.
to our experts on Instagram, right? And so when it comes to fertility, and I would even say when it comes to parenting, right? Like there are so many different approaches and there are so many different schools of thought. And what I find is that a big part of the struggle and the frustration and the stress comes from just not knowing what to believe, not knowing even what the problem is, right? So there's a lot of people who, after let's say a year of trying, and this is what I would always recommend is, around that 12-month mark, if you are on a fertility journey and you are trying to conceive, I always recommend give yourself at least 18 months. Now, this is the recommendation for if you're under 35. If you're looking at the literature, they say if you're over 35, then we actually should be after 6 months of trying. If you're not pregnant yet, then we're going to start to seek consultation with a doctor to do some testing to see if there's something we can find. But I like to say like at least 12 months, no matter what your age is, because I find once we start putting that timeline on things, it starts to get really, really stressful, even more stressful of like, oh my God, I only have 6 months. This needs to happen in 6 months, right? And right away that upregulates the nervous system because we start to go into like time scarcity. Right. So in any case, once people do, and if they do go to get testing done, a lot of the time it comes back saying everything's fine,
Yeah.
right? And that there's nothing quote unquote wrong with you, right? Which is what we call in medicine, we call that unexplained infertility. And so I think that is what's super hard. And that leads to even more stress of like, okay, well, if like nothing is wrong with me, then like, why is this not happening?
Is there an impact of social media or society in the sense that they and we all make it seem like you blink and it happens, right? Like I've heard this from people there where they feel the pressure. I'm so glad that you mentioned timeline because, you know, we can have certain expectations if we're trying for the first time or even sometimes with our second or third or whatever it is, right? It's not going to be the same. But these expectations that we have that are because of society and social media. Do you hear that from the parents you work with?
Yeah, 1,000%. And I believe a lot of our pain and suffering as humans is related to what our expectations are,
Mhm.
right? And like
True.
when our
Yeah.
lived experience doesn't meet what our expectation is, that's when we suffer. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people go into the journey, and I see both sides. I see some people starting to try to get pregnant with like a lot of hope, really kind of being strong in their belief that yeah, this is going to happen. And then when at month after month, they get their period and it's not happening, that's when they start to question it. Then I also see people who approach the journey already with fear and already with doubt for one reason or another. But what is hard for sure is that, once you do start trying, it's just, I often use this example and I'll relate it back. But like, I remember when I was pregnant and I was shopping for, like my stroller. I had
Mhm.
never seen a stroller on the street until I become pregnant and started,
Right?
right. And so it's like when you have this bias
Yeah.
that you don't notice things in your environment, but then once you actually become like you start to think about them, then you start to notice it everywhere around you, right? So maybe you are, not trying to get pregnant, so you don't notice pregnant people around you. But now that you're trying to get pregnant, that's all you see. And then it just seemed to be that like that's all you hear, like this person and that person, right? And then so of course that is super hard because then it just feels like, oh, well, it's happening for everybody except for me.
Yeah. And how do you support these parents? I think there's a mindset aspect to that that I'd love to get into, but somebody who's going through this might say, "Well, what can I possibly do? Like what is the work that I'm going to be doing that's going to lower the stress?" It's not we're not fixing anything, we're not solving any problem in that moment. I'm not pregnant, right? Like I'm still trying. What impact does the work you do have on somebody who is trying?
Yeah. So I like to see the work that I do with people as, it's not only leading to them, eventually getting and staying pregnant, but also something that helps for the long term. And that's why I really see this work. It's beyond, I would almost say essential, like essential life skills for the motherhood, the parenting journey. And in terms of the mindset shift, of course that it's so challenging, and I don't ever want to undermine that, right? But I do also see, and like you had asked a question when I was, reading about blame, of like often like we put this blame on ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so, while of course I understand that, and I think it's important to allow ourselves to feel however we're feeling. So if it's blame, if it's guilt, whatever it might be, it's sadness, it's grief, right? It's not about rejecting that and pushing it away. And there needs to be a balanced approach. We need to both be able to allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling, but and at the same time, when we're ready, like move past it, right? Because if we stay stuck in it, then that's not going to serve us either, right? And then that's a little bit tricky because that's going to be a little bit different for everyone. That timeline of like, well, how long do I allow myself to grieve? But so can we start to shift that blame, the grief that we're feeling, into like an openness of curiosity of like, okay, like what is the opportunity here? Like, what can I learn from this experience? And, what are some things? Because what I see often is that people are not getting pregnant because I like to try to see it like a greater reason of like, well, this is not maybe an ideal environment to be bringing a child into, right? And that's a hard truth sometimes to admit to ourselves, right? But like it really asks us to take a hard look at the way we're living. And like, is the lifestyle that we're living like a lifestyle that is actually conducive to bringing a child into the world?
You know, I've from friends that I've spoken with and heard about their journey or their friend's journey. The hard part of sitting with that emotion, which I do believe is very important as well, is sitting with that emotion,
Yeah.
right? And truly sitting with it, because also you're just like you mentioned before, you're navigating a world where you're just constantly reminded that everybody else might be expecting, and then you're in that position where you're trying and nothing's working, and maybe your fertility journey has been a year now or even more, and there has been nothing that has come out of it, and you've seen doctors, and so there's this sort of weight. So while you're trying to sit with the emotion, you're also being exposed to like reminders that you are struggling and other people are not. I can't imagine how hard this is, but what can we talked about mindfulness last time we spoke, and all of these techniques that you're using. Can you talk a little bit in terms of like how that can help in the moment in terms of sitting with the emotions, and what that might look like for a parent who's listening?
Yeah. And just listening to what you said, I was
Mm,
just I've been doing this work supporting women on their fertility journeys for 6 years now, and it is so hard.
yeah,
And this is it, is how can we help ourselves in the hard? And it's never taking away the hard. But again, it's always, and I think for a while when I first started doing this work, I kind of shied away a little bit from trying to feel like, or trying to be like overly inspirational and enthusiastic, because I didn't want that to, again, like, you know, be like for people to think that I was trying to undermine their pain. And it's like
right,
that's it has to be like a both situation of like, yes, we need to honor the challenge and pain, and we really need to truly see that in ourselves. But then also, something that is really helpful for the women I support and the couples I support is community. Is that like there's so much isolation in this experience, and we
right,
feel so alone in the experience. And there's also a lot of shame. And then what happens is that the shame causes us not to talk about it. And then when we don't talk about it, then we feel more alone, more isolated, right? And so I, for the past 6 years, have had support groups. I right now have an online community where women can come. I mean, I am teaching fertility yoga and meditation, but beyond those practices, it's meant to be a support group where people can come, and even if you're not talking to the other people in the group, you like start to see faces, and you're like, oh, this person, they're like me, they're like a human being. And oh wow. And and then once a month we have a monthly call where people come, and we'll talk, and we start to open up a little bit about our story and about the struggle. And then we start to see that, oh, okay, maybe we're not alone, there's actually a lot of other people that are going through this. And I think that needs to happen. Like, I think before we can move into the positivity and the being strong in the trust, in the belief that this will happen for me, what needs to happen first is the healing. Because if there is so much, if we're just caught up in this doubt and the shame and all of those maybe quote unquote negative, I don't like to label emotions as negative, but the heavier emotions, right, the more uncomfortable ones, right, well, can we heal from those? And then from that place, and can we find acceptance? So that's something also that I teach and educate is, you know and this culture of toxic positivity. It's like, well, we
right.
can't go into positivity before we've accepted and whatever it is that we're feeling, and the difficulty and the discomfort of what it is that we're feeling, right? So that has to happen first before we can then move into this openness of, okay, even though it hasn't happened, even though this is hard, even though whatever my journey has been, that doesn't mean that it's never going to happen. And actually there's things that I can do to empower myself, to actually make changes in my life that ultimately are going to serve me and my future family.
Thank you for bringing up the toxic positivity part because this is something that I know parents have told me that they are struggling. And then what they hear from family and friends is, it'll happen. Don't worry. Just be positive and everything will be okay. And that's, very maddening and frustrating for them because they are not. It's almost like saying that doesn't give them the space to feel angry and
Yeah.
right is that my that's my understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you had asked the question, how can family and friends support someone experiencing fertility struggles? And so, my big answer, if there's, your listeners are, have a friend, a loved one, a family member that is going through this, is, we need to practice the art of listening. Okay. And in the doula world, and we call this the art of holding space. And to hold space, I like the visual. I'm a visual learner, and I just think of like, okay, so if you were literally to be holding space, you're holding air. What are you doing? It's like you're doing nothing, but you are doing something because you're being an active listener, right? And so we need to allow people to express themselves without judge. And then on the other side is on the receiving end, we are not judging, we are not projecting, we are not offering unsolicited advice. We are simply listening with love, with compassion. We're making them feel validated in their pain. We're saying things like, oh, that must be so hard, right? And even if you can't relate because you haven't experienced it, like I personally haven't experienced fertility struggles, but I can still do this work because I can hold space. I can validate people's emotions. I can see them in their pain and their struggles, so that's the work. Often, and my clients, when they, say these things like, oh, like, so and so said this to me. And I always come back to like, we have to understand that, everybody, one of my philosophies in life is like, everybody's doing the best they can with the resources they
Right.
have. So, people, of course, like they mean well when they say these things. But I think we just need to help educate people on, how to hold space in a different way
And holding space on its own is something that many people struggle with.
because it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. Yes, and we wanna fix things right away, right?
Yes.
I wanna fix you, I want you to be happy, I'm not comfortable with you being sad right now, and so we're gonna move towards the happiness as fast as we can, right? And that's what happens, and I think, I could appreciate that you said, like, it's coming from a good place, like, I think people just don't know how to do that in general. It's, whether it's, you open up about a family member that's struggling with their health or somebody passes away. I know that those moments are all very uncomfortable moments for the other people, and it's the holding space piece that's very hard. That silence. I think that's uncomfortable, but that's what they need.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
I really appreciate that you brought that up. I'm thinking of couples that are going through this. Sometimes it's personal information and there might be shame around that. We spoke about that really briefly. It could be coming from the mom or the dad or which, one of the parents that are just saying, I don't want this to come out, I don't want people to know about our
Yeah,
struggles, I
absolutely.
this is our personal information. And then knowing the society we live in, like grandparents, great grandparents would be like, hey, you've been married for 5 years, where's that baby, right? So how can we the listeners, and how can we support that? Maybe somebody's listening to this and going through that and saying, I haven't spoken to anybody about this, and you spoke about the isolation piece. There's an isolation to it if we don't talk about it, and that's why I appreciate that you also have this community piece, because I think that is so important for our mental health and for any struggle that we're going through. But if a couple's listening to this and saying, yeah, we really haven't told anybody about this, what it have you heard of, people talk about this within your groups, and what is some advice that we can share with them?
Yeah, it is truly hard because, I see, again, it's always, I see things from both sides, right? And I completely understand and empathize with, not wanting to disclose this information, especially a lot of the women I work with. It's a bit tricky in their work scenario. I have some people that tell me that they work in a very male dominated environment where they just don't feel safe to disclose the information. They're also concerned about, maybe their role at their company or that it might be impacted, right? However, at the same time, especially if somebody is going to be undergoing fertility treatments, often fertility treatments, they require so many appointments that it's almost like having a second full-time job. And so people have to miss a lot of work. Then it feels like they're living a lie because they can't say the true reason
Right.
for why they're missing work. And then this just adds a layer of isolation and of shame, right? So
Right.
what I like to recommend, and as much as it can feel really hard, is there one person, right? Because often I think we see things, a lot of us, from this like all or nothing or black or white thinking of like, oh, if I, say this to one person, then like the whole, workplace is
Sure.
going to know about it, right?
Mm.
Same thing if I tell my one family member, well, then my whole family is going to know about it, right? But that I believe that that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, and that's also a little bit of like fear-based thinking. So I really believe that there's a way to say things and to be really honest. And I know it's so hard to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, but if we can be honest and be like, and just like a really heart-to-heart conversation of that one person in your workplace that makes you feel safe, and be like, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. I really don't want everybody in the workplace to know about this. I need to tell you because I have to be missing work and I don't want to be lying, but please, like, this is between you and I, right? And I'm not usually, in the business of telling people to promote like, secrets, but I think in this case, it's not like a secret. It's just more of like, how can you make me feel safe in my workplace?
Right, right. And so what I'm hearing is, it's okay to say you're allowed to have your personal information. You don't have to share this with the world, but have that one person that you feel safe with to at least say that, and it must feel good to at least open up and say, look, it's another doctor's appointment. I'm sorry, I have a lot of them. I'm going to be saying something different to our team, but I just need you to know, like, this is what I'm going through. And they don't need to know the details, but just opening up a little bit, I'm assuming is also, from my understanding, would be good for our mental health because the more we hold in, the more lies we're holding in, the more it's heavy, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
It's heavy
yeah.
to hold those secrets. And again, I really again believe in human good, and these stories that we're telling ourselves about what's going to happen when we tell that one person. I often believe that those don't come true. And that when we can say it in that open, honest way to that one safe, person, that they're going to meet us in a way that maybe we hadn't imagined, and we're going to have the experience of like, oh my god, I feel so much better now.
Right,
Yeah.
right. This part makes me think of an article that I was telling you about. So I was reading this paper. It's a 2022 paper. I'll put in the show notes for everybody listening. But they were saying that prior to 1980, infertility was thought of as being caused by a woman's psychological distress. And so the blame was entirely placed on the woman before 1980. That wasn't long ago, right? Like I couldn't believe that that's what and they were saying how still today in 2020, well, this is 2022, so still today, that they feel that the team that is, these fertility teams, they're not including mental health
Mm.
professionals in the way that they should. So it's still being treated, it's being treated as a physical thing when there's a very huge mental aspect to this, which is why I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I think it's so important, which is why you're here. Can you speak to that? Like, I mean, ignoring the mental
Yeah.
health aspect of this, there's huge consequence that's going to impact the woman and the mom and the dad longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I like to see, and absolutely we're not doing enough of this, but I am seeing some positive things in the space. And I find often I see other countries that are kind of groundbreakers in
Right.
terms
Yeah.
of this alternative, more, I mean, it's alternative in scare quotes, but I think it's becoming less alternative. But this concept of holistic health, or like mind body medicine. Like, I actually had a discovery call with an anesthesiologist this week, and she's like, I get it. Like, she's going through fertility problems and she understands the importance of, working on her mental health and her mindset and trying to, overcome the challenge. So I do see positive things happening, but, it's unfortunate though that we're at this place where it's kind of like Western. Sometimes I feel like it's, I mean, not a battle, but it's like either Western medicine or holistic medicine, and
Right.
that like
One or the other.
yes, right. And so like, how can we integrate these two, right? And there are studies that show that mind body programs, that when somebody is trying to conceive and they do as little as a 6 week mind body program, that this mind body program can lead to success rates of between 42 and 56%. Okay. So, and then that's compared to IVF and IUI, right? Which, depending on a lot of different factors, can have like as low success rate as like 8 to 10% sometimes, right? So it's like, and we know this. We know that these mind body programs can definitely help increase the efficacy of fertility treatments. So it's like, so why are we not using them? And I mean, I think this, it's rooted in, I mean, at least here where we live in Quebec, right? It's rooted in politics and in money. And I mean, there's so much.
Yeah.
But yes, we
Yeah.
need to be working towards a more integrated, holistic approach where I am not anti Western medicine. I am not. IVF is very, very invasive. I'm not against fertility treatments. I work with a lot of same sex couples who have to use fertility treatments in order to
Right.
get pregnant, right? So it is wonderful that we have this. I have a lot of clients who use donor eggs and are able to get pregnant with donor eggs, right? So the fact that we have these tools at our disposal is incredible. However, I'm a big advocate of, can we start with holistic means before we go the more invasive route? Because there's also a lot of side effects and consequences to these fertility procedures with all the hormones that we need to inject in our body.
Right, right, and that was, I'll put that in the show notes as well, but I had a conversation with Tara Schwartz, who she talks about that in her book, right? And just showing up to work and not feeling well, and that the physical consequences of going through these treatments, I know are very heavy. I want to, as we're nearing the end of our conversation, I think maybe there might be people who are hearing, this mind body program and maybe are still not sure, what does that mean and what does holistic mean, and if I want to join this, what am I going to be doing? So can we just talk a little bit more about the details of that, like what somebody can expect?
Yeah. And I think that is now going to be my work for the next few years, is like really helping people to understand that, because when you're in it, it's just like, oh, like this is what it is. It just makes sense. But I think I constantly need to be reminded that this is new for a large part of the world when we talk about mind body. Because I mean, I've been in this world, of mind body work, like having studied meditation and yoga for the past 15 years. Like this is just part of the fabric of my life. But, it's the idea that we're going beyond the physical body, right? And so when we're talking about the mind, we're looking into like, what are the thoughts that we are thinking? What are the words that we are saying to ourselves at any given moment of the day? And I think that is, I think, pretty easy for anybody to understand, because I think we are all aware of the fact that we have conversations with ourselves, right?
Mhm.
And
They're not
so
always pretty.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But then, often, like, when this is new, it's kind of like, it's almost like we don't even have that awareness that we have this
Mm.
internal voice. And so this is what the practice of meditation and then mindfulness, and, maybe on like another show, we can get into the difference between
Mhm.
mindfulness and meditation, because we don't have that time for
Right.
that now,
Yeah.
but like when we start to develop this awareness of, oh, I'm actually talking to myself a whole lot more than I think. I'm actually living in this future, like this some made up scenario in the future, rather than in the here and now of the present moment, way more than I
Mm.
think. I'm actually living in the past of all of these things that had happened. And I said,
Mm.
right? So when we start to bring awareness to these things, right, we can start to realize that, oh, the way we're talking to ourselves is actually not serving us. And then when I say serving us, it's just like, well, are you saying, like, are you beating yourself up? Coming back to the emotional piece of like, are you shaming yourself? Often we do, by the way we talk to ourselves in our head, right? And then it's like, okay, so once we develop the awareness of how we're doing this, also how we're breathing when we're talking about nervous system regulation. A lot of my clients start to develop the awareness that they can't feel their breath coming down to their lower abdomen, that they really feel their breath constricted in the area of their chest or their throat. I often, when we're doing breath work, I will, count the breath, and we try to get to a point where we're inhaling to a point of, like a count of at least four. And a lot of people have a hard time doing that. Right. So we start to bring awareness to, oh, I didn't even realize I was holding my breath. When we're breathing in an irregular way, when we're holding our breath, this is often a sign that our nervous system is deregulated, right? Or that we're
Right.
very much in this activation stress response And so this is why, just changing the way we breathe is such a huge, powerful tool to help us regulate our stress, but also to, help overcome fertility challenges.
Thank you for painting that picture because I do think that many people will keep hearing mind body and keep hearing holistic. And I think it's still something that we're learning about as a society. So it's good to hear that. And the power of our thoughts is just something that we don't talk about enough. We know about it. We know there's the research around it, but how one thought can lead to an emotion and how that emotion that's lingering throughout the day, even as a parent, leads to you yelling at your child and you're like, "Oh, it wasn't that bad. Like, why did I just like lose it? I went from 0 to 100." And I always tell parents, you yes, it felt like you went from 0 to 100, but the 1 to 99 was there. You just weren't aware of it. Yeah, it happened at some point during the day. And so I think when we develop that awareness of what do I need right now? How am I feeling? Noticing that shallow breath, noticing that we're holding our breath, right? These are all parts of, um, our emotional health and well being and even emotional intelligence. And so I think it's so important that you're doing that work with people, especially that are going through a really rough time and difficult part of their life, because yeah, all of that really impacts other things, right? We could be going through fertility struggles and it's going to impact how we're concentrating at work. And so the
A
work that
thousand
you're doing
percent.
to
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so noticing that and realizing the impact it's having is the first step. And then doing the work that you're talking about, I think is just it should be part of all of everybody's journey, even parents,
Yeah.
right? Just
Yeah.
yeah, those
So
skills,
that
like
so
you
we can,
said.
and this is, again, why the women I work with when they're on the other side of their journey. And even actually I'm thinking of one client who's still not pregnant to this day, but she's worked with
Mm,
me for a few years and gone through my Fertile from Within program, and she now has started giving talks to the community of her
mm,
own of to empower women and to inspire them that, like, her what was such a pain and struggle of her fertility journey has now turned into a gift, even though she's still not
mm,
pregnant, right? And she
right.
can now see it in that way because she's learned all these skills, and she can see it through that lens of, this has been a gift because now I've made so many changes in my life, and I'm so much happier of a person right now, even though I don't have
Right.
my baby yet.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Thank you for sharing that experience. I know that somebody listening to this and probably struggling themselves, there might not be a light for them, right? Like saying like how can I see that positive aspect to it? And it's not necessarily saying that you will get there now, but trying to find ways, like you said, to sit with the emotion first and then eventually when you're ready, which I love that you said that, you will move past or work with it, right? Work with the emotions that are there. Thank you. Everything that you shared, I think, is just so important for parents that are listening. What, I guess, to close the conversation, what advice do you have for parents that are listening to this in terms of maybe what the next steps are if they haven't thought about mind body work? And then how can they reach you? And I'll make sure that everything is in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So what I did this spring was I put together a free resource, which I call my Mind Body Fertility Toolkit. And so it's basically a sample of the tools that I teach and that I offer, that are highly effective when practiced regularly. Right. And I think that's really important to mention, because, somebody may, give yoga or meditation a try once or twice, decide they don't really love it, or maybe that it didn't work, but these tools really become effective, of course, when we practice them with consistency. But to help people just get a little bit of a feel, a taste of what it is in the toolkit, I have two fertility yoga practices, I have two breathing exercises, and I have two guided meditations for fertility. And then beyond just the experience of it, what I also have is explanations, because, of course, I come from this science background, and I know that, most people are going to be more open to something when they kind of can have that cognitive, like, understanding of, like, why this is something I actually should take the time to do. So I also give those explanations of why these tools are effective. So that's a free resource. It's actually like a course. So
Right.
you can sign up for it, and then you get access to all of those practices.
Perfect. I'm going to put that link in the show notes.
Yeah.
So I guess somebody who's listening to this at this point, that would be a starting point. Get the toolkit, start with the first steps in terms of getting to know what that looks like, this mind body program for you and getting a bit of a snippet of it, right? And then if they have any questions, do you have a social media account that they can learn more from you?
Yes, yes. So I have two accounts. I know that sometimes feels complicated, but I am at breathe with Lauren. So that's my main Instagram account. But then I recently started a second account at Fertile from Within, specifically for people that are looking for fertility support. And I am active on both. I also have my website, which is breathewithlauren.com, and there's quite a lot on my website. It describes my different programs. It gives I do case studies, which I think is really important. So when people work with me, after they're done working with me, I ask them to fill out some questions. And on my website, I have different case studies of people that have gone through it's called my Fertile from Within program, which is that holistic program. And yeah, so you can just kind of see what it's like to work with me and what it's like to go through my program, some results that you can expect.
Thank you. I don't often give the space for somebody to share all their information, but I think the scarcity of content and resources for people that are going through these fertility struggles, it shouldn't be. They should have access to a lot more. And so I wanted to make sure that you had that space because
Oh,
it's really important work. So
thank you,
thank you,
Cindy.
Lauren.
I appreciate it. And of course, this is I didn't get too much in at the beginning. You asked me like how I came to this work, and I
Mm,
didn't get too much into that. I know now's not the time with it, but I
right.
hope you can, and your listeners can just get the sense of like this is really for me like heart-based work. I really just came about this because I've been following my heart. Like I was a high school science teacher, and then from that, like went on to become a birth doula and teaching yoga. And really now I'm making this shift towards making my fertility coaching my full-time work because there is just such a need for it. And I'm just really, really passionate about it. And, the one thing that I would just love to like anybody who's on a journey, I would just love to leave them with like, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. But also, it's just hope. And like maybe, like the typical expression, like I'm just gonna hope and pray or just stay positive. Like just staying positive, that also is not effective. So don't lose
Right.
hope, but also like sit with yourself and be like, okay, like what do I really need here? Because
Mm,
there are resources out there. A lot of those just free kind of Facebook support groups. I don't usually recommend those because they're not regulated.
mm.
There are some great free groups out there, but you get what you pay for, right? And so when you're looking for support, sometimes you really do need someone to moderate that. So
Exactly.
um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I agree.
yeah,
Thank you for the work that you do.
yeah, you're welcome.